Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Clark, and I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I am just so excited to introduce our virtual web series. So I just want to thank you all for joining tonight. Once again, my name is Chris Clark, and I am joined by my co-host Egwu, Nwankpah. And we have three esteemed panelists tonight. But before we jump into the panel discussion, I just want to give you a little background about how this all came about. So about a month ago, when we were just getting used to this shelter in place lifestyle that we've been living, Egwu came to me with this opportunity to partner on an opportunity that I honestly had been thinking about for a long time, a way to give back to the community virtually through a series of programming. We want to be able to tackle topics like mental health in the Black community, parenting in the 21st century, e-learning, and tonight, navigating today's job market. So really excited about tonight's first episode of Compass Talks. But before we jump in, I'll pass to my co-host Egwu to go through some housekeeping items.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for counting me in there. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Usually during this time we would have announcements, and since it's the first week, we want to give some shout outs to all the people who made this happen. There are a lot of people behind the scenes who are helping us and doing the magic. So we wanted to give a special shout out to Kinetic Consulting, Sheldon Kennedy. We wanted to give a shout out to Space Age, Robert Baker, for all the things that they're doing to produce this event. We also wanted to thank our esteemed panelists that you'll be introduced to shortly. They come from very diverse backgrounds. They come from successful careers, and just having them all on one place, coming from their various corners of the universe in quarantine is very much appreciated. So I'll pass it back to Chris and enjoy everybody.
Thanks, Ed. So as Egwu said, we are joined by three prominent professionals across the And first, we have Jasmine Charlie from Jasmine leads a global team of customer success analysts at LinkedIn, partnering with the company's largest and most strategic clients. Thanks for joining us, Jasmine. Next, we have and Cecilia Columbus Business School, where she specializes in advising MBA students on the design and development of their overall career strategies. And she does so through both large format seminars and one-on-one coaching. On top of her day job, she also serves on the university's Diversity and Inclusion Council and has spent many years prior to Columbia working in and off of Wall Street at Enron, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Thanks for joining us, Cecilia. And our last panelist is none other than Toni Harris Quinterly from Egon Zehnder, where she is a consultant and executive coach as a part of the company's advisory practice. She has expertise in leadership development and culture change. And prior to joining Egon Zehnder, she was director at YSC Consulting with a focus on executive and team coaching. Thanks for joining us, Toni. So I also have an amazing co-host with me. But before I introduce him, because I want to leave him for last, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Clark. I work at Google right now, where I focus on building onboarding development and cultural appreciation programming for underserved communities, all in service of equity and inclusion. I'm also a former global lead for the Google's Black Googler Network, which is one of our co-partners for tonight. And overall, I just spend my life trying to make a measurable impact for those often left without a voice. But last but not least, esteemed, is my co-host, Egwu. Egwu is currently a vice president at Bank of America as a part of the supplier diversity and responsible sourcing team, and he serves as a supplier diversity manager at the bank. And I think a lot of you know him for this. He's also the co-chair for the Black Professionals Group of New York at the bank, and serves as the ambassador for the National Association of Black Accountants. So an amazing panel, amazing co-host, and look forward to just end with the question. So this question is for you, Jasmine. Obviously this is a little bit different than we might normally do our panels live in color. But given the current economic state, mixed with, of course, the social distancing and shelter-in-place protocols, how should someone actively looking for employment use this time?
Great. Thank you, Chris. Love that question. So a couple of comments. One thing I want to call out, that when job hunting during what really is a difficult time, remember that this is a very unique situation that no one could have ever anticipated, right? And so while some companies may have hiring freezes, many are still interviewing for open positions. They just may not be moving as fast as originally planned. So show understanding, practice empathy, and don't necessarily interpret any delays in response to lack of interest from those organizations. So that's my PSA, but some kind of practical tips that I would encourage any job seeker to start to employ. Use this time to research. It's really important to understand where there's growth happening in the economy, and that could be industry specific or it could be role specific, and really anchoring and aligning your growth or your search on where that growth happens. And being mindful that just because you don't come from that industry does not mean that individuals are not looking for folks like you. A recent study showed that 60% of the last months of hires for some organizations came outside of their industry. So that should be good news for job seekers. A couple other things that are really straightforward: self-audit. Take a look at your skills, understand what sets you apart, and then be able to tell that story really effectively. Think about things, certifications, experiences that you've had. If you've worked remotely, given the kind of change in our economic climate to working remote, those are things you may want to highlight. Having a really strong digital footprint. I can't work at LinkedIn and not call that out. Making sure your LinkedIn profile, your resumes, and other places where recruiters may interact with your brand is really strong and marketable. And if there are skills that you want to grow and really lean into, take advantage of a lot of the ways that companies are opening the gates on certain curriculum, LinkedIn included, right? Signing up for a LinkedIn learning license and really upskilling yourself if that's going to enable your job hunt. And then one of my favorite is networking. Once you've got all of your assets kind of up to speed and updated in a way that you want, make sure you're leaning on your network. One of the things I love about LinkedIn is its ability to connect talent to opportunity. We've seen a 55% increase in engagement between individuals on the platform, which to us signals a really robust networking opportunity. So get out there, schedule those informational interviews, those coffee chats, and similarly, be empathetic to where people may be. Don't necessarily take it personal if those responses are a little slower than normal. And then I think as the very last thing, apply for those jobs, whether it's on LinkedIn, other job boards, or the organization's kind of native website, making sure that you're applying frequently.
Thanks, Jasmine. I want to pass to Cecilia too, just from the point of view of advising MBA students who clearly invested in their career at Columbia University and are now, some of them are dealing with this. So same question. And best using this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with a lot of the things Jasmine said, everything Jasmine said. I think there's, a student might be sitting, in a very anxious spot. It's easy to get anxious in isolation, right? And easy to say, well, I can't do anything now. And what I would encourage all people to do, especially students, is get out there, keep your networks warm. And of course, you have to be empathetic. But I would also say that, look, everyone had to cancel their travel, their conferences, their meetings. And unless they have a difficult situation at home, they might actually be more available to connect. And so keep that in mind as you're reaching out to people, reaching out to new people. But certainly it's a great time to reach out to people you've met created in your network in the past, and check in with them. Ask them how they are. I think that is something they'll be receptive to. Ask them how things are in their industry, in their company, how they've adjusted to working at home. And I think that really can strengthen relationships. So even if that person isn't in a position to help you in your career path immediately, they'll certainly remember that warm approach. I think increasing your skills from home is a great time. We've always been, in MBA recruiting, we haven't had to do much in the way of online interviewing. And now that is a thing of the past. I think we're in a new era now, and this is the time to practice. Get your friend on Zoom, practice, mock interview. For those students who've landed and have not begun their jobs because it was for post-graduation, it's also an anxious time. What's going to happen? Many companies might push back start dates. We see more of that than anything else. We think there is a strong pipeline still, certainly for full-time. For those that might have internships, the format's going to change. It's okay. But a big reminder to students, stay flexible. You have gotten so far with the goals that you have and the drive that you have. But remember, sometimes there's different paths to end goals, and you might need to be patient while a company resolves something. Maybe it's a slightly different job you might have to do when you get there. But that's okay, because as long as you're growing your skills, you're going to be in a good place.
Thank you.
Cecilia, I'm sorry. I just wanted to double click on a really powerful point that you made, which was reaching out to people just to check in and see how people are doing. I know that the hunger of the job search process can make people feel as though, how do I reach out to someone? I'm looking for a job. It's very awkward, and I get that. But actually just reaching out to someone and saying, how are you doing? And and what's going on, and how is this looking for you, and how are things happening in your industry? That kind of conversation can be really energizing for someone, especially when you're back to back on Zoom meetings and you have 50 million things going on in your house. It's just giving people an opportunity to have an engaging conversation on a human level. So I'd encourage that. You don't want to come across with mixed intentions. If you're looking for a job, then that'll be obvious in your tone. But actually finding a way to be patient and connect on a human level will go so much further down the line. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
I agree.
That's a really good point. One of the things that I noticed last time I was in business school, many moons ago, we had the last recession. And I remember not going in with an MBA meaning this much, and then when I came out, an MBA meant this much. Still meant well, and I still enjoyed it, but now we're in a different situation. I think this is a different type of recession. It was faster, right? I don't think anyone saw it coming. It's no one knows really when it's going to end, and most people are thinking, what is the new normal? What do I do if I don't shake hands with people anymore? I can't do all these things. So, Tony, what are some of the things that you think people can use to kind of, develop themselves and develop relationships that might not be there in the short term?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the first thing to remember is that just like in 2008 and recessions before then, we are all in dealing with it, right? We are all dealing with it. And so sometimes the job process can bring the job search process and being unemployed or feeling underemployed or not being sure about what your next step is going to be. It can make you feel really anxious, and you can feel some shame around, I've invested all of this money in my last job or time in my last job and money and time in my current degree or whatever program you're in. I think it's important to just step back and say we're all in the same boat. While some of us are feeling the pressure of this more than others, rightfully so, we are all seeing the context. So I think that's the first important thing to know. The second thing is, and it goes back to my point prior, reaching out to connect to people on a human level and being transparent with your aspiration, which is that I want to learn something. I think that there's for my days of fundraising way back in the day, we would always say, if you ask for money, you get advice. And if you ask for advice, you get money. I think it's the same thing on the job search. If you're reaching out to ask people for information and to understand what's happening in their world and to understand what they're seeing and to understand how to make sense of who you are in their space, people will open the floodgates of insight and advice because people like to talk. People love to talk about themselves, and people love to talk about the things that they wish someone had told them. When you reach out to someone saying, hey, are y'all hiring? Or when is this going to happen? That immediately puts up a barrier, more so because people are genuinely altruistic and want to help. And if they can't help you, they're inclined to shut down. So I would say really thinking about, what do you want to know beyond when is this job hiring and if and how? and really get into some substantive questions, people remember the person who asked them the most curious and powerful question. They always remember that person. And that's always the person who they think of when someone comes along and says, do you know someone who has X skill or X capability? They're usually thinking of the person who asks them the best question. So I'd say get your journal out and start thinking about what you want to know and get those questions down.
I think that's really powerful there, especially Tony, the piece about just avoiding kind of that open-ended question, be direct, had that planned out, but then also really drilling into somebody's persona and their background so they get to talk about themselves and talk about that advice that they wish they had. I'm curious, Jasmine, just from the world that you're in, from a digital standpoint, thinking about LinkedIn, what are some things people should be avoiding during this time? Like what shouldn't they be doing while they're away from the office or away from the opportunity to meet with somebody in person? What should they avoid doing online?
Yeah, that's a great one, right? And I feel like as our digital footprints and kind of our experience is really building our identities on a digital space, so that answer starts to change over time. And so I want to lean on kind of the things I've seen and that have either taken me aback or maybe been a blocker for people who are looking for roles and opportunities. And so the same things I've told my team is you should control what you can control. And so gone are the days where like networking in person is the only way, right, that you can build rapport with folks, especially in this kind of COVID reality. So being really thoughtful about the messages that you send, being really thoughtful about those cover letters and really controlling that experience. And there are not going to be a lot of opportunities for future employers to maybe get a good sense of who you are outside of some of those digital moments, right? And then some of the things that maybe go without saying, but understanding what your professional footprint is versus your kind of personal one, right? Like the Facebooks and the Instagram of the world all serve their purpose. It probably should look a little bit different than the way that you show up in a professional environment. And so just being mindful of that, not to erase any part of your personality or who you are. One of the reasons I love the company that I work for is I get to show up as my whole self every day. That doesn't mean that the posts I make on Twitter are going to be the same things that I'm sharing on my LinkedIn platform, right? And so just being really mindful of the way that first impressions may be moving. And people may be having these impressions of you without you even being in the room, right? Things that are forwarded to them and their own kind of biases coming into there. So I think that's kind of the first thing I would say. And I think Cecilia may have touched on this, but like not using your network or not partnering with your network. So really leaning into, it's not just about organizations that you may want to work at. It could just be peers from college, from your undergrad, from MBA programs, and really kind of showing up for each other and using those opportunities. If someone's having a hard time with a resume or a hard time prepping for an interview, offering up your time to really like be in the trenches with each other, that's going to be and remain really important if folks are navigating this kind of new temporary, hopefully normal.
Great, super powerful there. And I'm over here taking notes myself, Jasmine. Thank you. Before I pass to Egwu,
I want to add a little bit to that, Jasmine. I think one of the best tools has been the alumni pages on LinkedIn for the schools that you've gone to. Don't forget your school networks. And it's so easy to use that tool and narrow down by industry, by company. And it'll even tell you if they've once worked there and then gone on to do something else. So as you think about paths, it's also easy to help track by looking at other people's paths and exit opportunities and things like that through that route.
I love that call out. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And before I pass to Egwu, I just want to do a quick check-in logistically. If you have any questions while you're out there, please do submit them. There's a little chat window to the right of the video. You can submit them there, and that'll pass through to us, so we can look to integrate talk. So Egwu?
Yeah, thank you, Cecilia. You jumped and you answered a question that I had in advance, so I appreciate that. One of the things that we want to talk about is interviewing. Now, digital interviewing skills are often, looked at as different than live skills, right? One is in your house, so no one knows if you're wearing pants. The other one is that your system capabilities now need to be in tune because you don't want your internet or Wi-Fi cutting off in the middle of an answer in an interview. So can we explain, and I'll leave it up to whoever wants to answer it the best, even though we had kind of who should go through. But if Tony or Cecilia, you want to talk about how you're preparing people or how people should prepare for these virtual interviews now.
I'm happy to jump in. What's interesting is, so I work largely with an executive population of all ages, right? But it's funny because a lot of employers are wildly uncomfortable with their sort of challenges or ignorances being exposed to the candidate. So I think the first thing is recognize that you are not the only person who's nervous about this. They are concerned, they are worried, they don't want to show up as being unprofessional. They don't want to, they're usually in the power position during the interview. And now they're in a vulnerable spot. Some people may have never used Zoom, may have never had to use Zoom or any other platform to interview. So keeping that in mind and trying to make the experience as comfortable as possible for you, but also as comfortable as possible for them. So being patient if it takes people a while to get online, recognizing that it's not just you, but it may be the person on the other end who's struggling a little bit. I think having a couple of backup plans handy is important. So make sure you have that person's email address teed up in your phone. I like to have my phone ready with an email with their address in it, with my cell phone number in it, saying, if we get disconnected, please feel free to call me back on this line. Sometimes I'll send that in advance. These little tricks, I always tell people, if you're in school in the digital age, you are probably more accustomed to being on a digital platform than most other people. So leverage that to your advantage and see yourself as a resource in this space, and know that you're not the only one who's a little bit nervous about this. There are many other things I could say, but I'm sure my coworkers, my co-panelists and partners will have other things to add. So that's what I'll throw in the pot.
I'll jump in here. One is I suggest wearing pants. Let's start there.
Anecdotal.
But keep it professional. If you are new to a company or if you were interviewing, even if they are more casual because they're at home or more casual even generally speaking, dress up, dress the part, shave, put on that button down, look the part, look professional. But keep your confidence. And I think this is true on or off digital platforms. You have to have the confidence because, for example, if you are interviewing for a client-facing role, your confidence level is part of what the interview is about. Can you keep your cool? Can you maybe even drive the conversation in the case that Tony mentioned, where the executive you might be interviewing with is uncomfortable with the technology or how things are going? Like, set them at ease, make the small talk, connect with them, ask them how they are, how their family is. Did they, leave town to manage this? How's the company dealing with it? It often feels like as the interviewee, you're in the hot seat, but it goes a long way to set the tone. And, remember, especially if somebody's been interviewing people all day, they're tired, they're sick of it. You want to be remembered. So don't forget to label yourself as you're giving your introduction. I can get into now, how you really need to tell your story and how important that is. But that pitch, that initial story about yourself is very important.
So you tell that identity being super important, to kind of hone into that reminds me of what Jasmine was talking about earlier in terms of not washing away yourself online, but instead managing it and being aware of your different personas, professional and personal. I'm curious, I'm actually going to pass back to you. One of the things that consistently year over year in the DEI, companies talk about their diversity, right? They talk about, how different groups will rank like above 80%, something like even 90% of the company will rank diversity, equity, inclusion is important for the mission of the company, right? I know at Google and LinkedIn, which are two companies that I look at mostly because they're in my industry, of course, 95% of the company says that diversity, equity, inclusion should be like a top value of the company. I think interview settings, so to know how to like what they bring to the table from a diversity standpoint. So I'm just curious when it comes to identity, people bringing their full selves to that interview setting, what are some tips that you have in terms of helping people best leverage who they are as an individual and not just who they are as a professional? So I pass that to you first, Cecilia, and then to you, Tony.
Sure. At the end of the day, I think that your experiences and the way you identify problems to solve and run with them is the most important thing, right? It's the impact you bring. And if that impact is because you were able to make a difference in your community, then you bring that, right? That's, if you are identifying a need for financial literacy in the Hispanic community, can you talk about how you've been able to bring that and you've shown your leadership skills? That will also bring out the fact that you are good at presentation skills. That will also bring out, some of these themes. I think that that's where our diversity can be the most important. I think that without having to call out anything in particular, somebody's going to appreciate how you bring yourself and you bring your skill set and you identify when you can be helpful in a situation. Oftentimes somebody's being interviewed they're interested in hiring you because they heard something you said about how you identified the need in your team to do something that maybe not your day-to-day job, but you thought it might make the group work more cohesively. So that becomes much more important because you're making an impact and you're making everybody's jobs a lot easier. And someone can see on the other side of the table, they're going to contribute quickly. They're going to make my job easier. And I can also see how they're going to contribute to the overall culture of my firm. And I find that very important.
Cecilia, I couldn't agree more with the idea that who you are and not just what you do makes a contribution to any workforce. And I think that the more comfortable we get with understanding who we are and what that means for the way that we see the world and the way that we experience the world, it will be easier for us to translate those experiences and those viewpoints into real tangible value for the company. So what I'm not saying is that you're out here, stating the business case for your humanity or your identity, because that's another problem for a whole host of other reasons. But when you sit down and you say, who am I, right? What does it mean for me to be, what does it mean for me to hold an identity as a mother? And how does that have an impact on the way I see the world, on the way that I experience the world, which is mine to hold and to know and to have that kind of confidence coming into the room. What's important for the employer to know is how I translate that experience to real tangible value every day, right? So what I know about negotiating with a less than rational partner, if you will. Now, they don't need to know that I learned that from negotiating chicken nugget portion sizes with a 3-year-old, but they do need to know that I am a top negotiator. And I'm being a little cute here about it. But what I am saying is, the more I know about my story and my core identities as a Black woman, as a mother, as a person who grew up in a low middle class community in a upper class state, like all of these things that have an impact on the way I see the world, when I'm able to walk into a conversation with a client, with a job interview and say, based on this experience, I spent a lot of my life understanding equity and inequity in systems, because I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, which is a city that deals with a lot of poverty and a state that has a lot of wealth. So I had very early exposure to economic inequity, and it shaped the way that I view the world. And this is how I translate it when I'm doing X, Y, and Z thing in a job. And here's where it aligns with the work that you do. That's a very clear and compelling narrative. Maybe 25% of it was spent on my actual identity, but I quickly made the link to what it did for my capability and what it can do for the company. And being able to stand in that, I think, is core. And by the way, people find it interesting. They find it intriguing, and it creates an opportunity for them to make a similar connection. So in sum, know who you are, know how who you are shapes the way you see the world, and being able to make a clear connection between how that viewpoint impacts the way you work, the value you add, and how you see that adding value in this organization.
Yeah, you go ahead.
No, I was saying that also connectivity with humans is really what this is about. And so you might seem very different on the surface, but there's going to be that nugget of identity that you can share. And that's why getting to know each other as people is so important in that scenario.
Thanks for that. Thanks to all the viewers out there. We're getting a couple questions, and I don't want anyone to assault me for not asking. So let me move to a question online from Nick Hall. He asks, when moving into an industry that's completely different from your your educational professional background, what's the best way to craft your story? Any one of you?
I love that. I can take a stab at that first. So I'll actually speak from firsthand experience. I studied political science and psychology, started my career in kind of the talent space and consulting, and made a pretty big pivot 5 years ago into tech and customer success, which I'll be honest, customer success was not a framework, was not a word, was not a career path that I knew much about, right? And almost to steal what we've already shared, and Tony, I really appreciated what you shared, it's really about recognizing that every part of my experience framed the right way and understanding what the business is hiring me to do or what they're trying to accomplish. If I can tie those two things together, that's kind of the first step, right? Understanding how those two things really connect. And then I think the other part of it is really doing your own due diligence to get yourself up to speed on this new industry that you may be entering. We are in such a great space as humans with access to information, to people. And so I really put it on myself of, it's not enough to just say, hey, I didn't come from this background, and so that's going to be my excuse of why I can't have an opinion in a meeting or whatnot. I'm going to put some onus on myself to learn, to tap into these new peers of mine, right, in those organizations. And I think the other part, depending on where you are in your career path and your job hunt, is to spend your time looking at companies that value that type of diverse experience, that value the fact that you are coming from maybe a background that is not as straightforward as one would seem or would think about that particular role, because they're already setting themselves up to want to see you grow and to probably have the processes in place to help you across the finish line, right, and really get you up to speed.
Yeah, I can also add to that. I think that it is up to you to connect those dots for the person listening, right? Don't assume anyone's creative and can connect them for you. So if you're having trouble thinking like, how does this relate? Part of the networking process is self-assessment, right? Ask people in the target market that you're going to, saying, look, I studied this, I've done this in my past. What do you think about that background, right? This is why I think I would be good for this. What do you think? And let people talk. Use those folks as mentors, because, listen enough, and then all of a sudden this starts to become part of your story. And so part of the networking process is this research, is this self-assessment that you should be doing to make those connections. I was working with a student this year who came from the media industry, agency world in LA, and wanted to make a pivot to investment banking. So it seems pretty different on the surface, but if you think about it, it's like, what's important, right? Is to be in finance and covering clients and investment banker and an advisory role. Well, it's client services. You need to be available. You may be dealing with high pressure situations with difficult clients. Well, media, can't think of, a better place where you'd be dealing with difficult people, working long hours, dealing with difficult situations. Maybe the problems you're analyzing are not in financial models, but you're still analyzing problems. So how do you create that storyline?
I couldn't agree more. And the perspective that I would add is just, I spend a lot of my time working with executives and leaders of large corporations. And most of them will tell you that the roles that they are in right now are not where they started out in their career. Now, there are some people who I know who said, I went to school to study engineering, and then I became an engineer, and then I was a better engineer, and then I was an even better one, and then I led all the engineers. But that is the exception and not the rule in most of my work and most of my experience. And I will tell you that the world is moving rapidly and changing so quickly. So nobody is doing a job now that they're likely to be doing 20 years from now, because the world is going to look different 5 years from now. So some of it is about getting accustomed to the practice of constantly pivoting and changing and shifting and understanding how you take what you know and you leverage it differently. This is the new normal. This is the new normal. So thinking about, how do you learn? How do I learn? Do I learn best by reading? Do I learn best by connecting to people? Do I learn best by doing? Okay, then I need to make sure that if I'm constantly pivoting, I'm constantly playing to my strengths and making sure I'm creating those kinds of learning experiences for me. But do not expect anybody in any job today to be in that same kind of job industry 10 years from now, or know that that's not going to be the majority of the case, because we probably will just not even be living in the same world.
I think that's super powerful. I think the idea that was mentioned earlier about controlling what you can control, I think that was you, Jasmine, who said that, is really important at this time, and kind of getting back to you and what do you bring to the table. Super valuable. I want to go back to the question that before Nicole's question from Rip City 313. Rip City, thanks for joining. The question really is centered around companies who have smaller departments, smaller companies, smaller organizations that may not advertise early career openings like some of our larger companies do with like robust career websites. So the question really is, how do you find those jobs and how do you network if you don't really see any job opportunities at a company advertised, and you might not even see people on LinkedIn with, leader or director or manager or VP titles to reach out to and hopefully advocate for you. So just some advice there. And I'm actually gonna pass it to Jasmine first, and then anyone else can take it from there.
Yeah, wow, that is a very compelling question. And so I think there are a couple of things that you can think about, right? I still think it starts a little bit with research. So finding folks that maybe are in the role that you are looking for and understanding how they got there. A lot of folks may actually start their career out in those smaller organizations before they end up at some of kind of those like big names and logos that we understand. So I think starting there, tapping into your network again, right, of folks who maybe are peripheral to the roles, and maybe they don't do that exact thing, but they may have an opinion or some influence or some thoughts around that position. And part of me thinks old school, right? Like I can hear my dad in my voice or in my ear saying, pick up the phone. If the company exists, pick up the phone, right? If you can't find a digital footprint for them, then give them a ring, see what you may be able to uncover. And so I don't think that any effort that leads you closer to an answer is effort well spent.
Can I just offer a personal anecdote just to emphasize how true Jasmine's comments are? The job that I hold now, I got introduced to the firm from someone who I had met 4 years prior at an event, who I reached out to and called when I was just thinking about what I wanted to do next, and said, can you help me understand what this world looks like? The job that I had before then, I got from someone who I met at a going away party, and we started talking and realized that we were both doing the same kind of work. And I called her one night on an SOS saying, oh my God, how in the world do I do what I'm doing? And it turned into her coaching me, which then turned into her recruiting me. Same thing with the job before that. So the last 3 jobs that I had, which have been the highest paying, and the most pivotal in my career, have had to engage them about how I can become better at the work I was doing today. They saw that drive, saw that interest, coached me on what my problem was, and then said, how do we talk about you doing some of that where I am? And these were all small organizations or small-ish organizations, and none of these were advertised positions. Moral of the story, when you can make meaningful connections with people, they will find opportunities and doors will open. And so if you see a small organization that you're keen to understand more about, finding those people and reaching out to understand more about that organization, not how you get the job tomorrow, finding those people and ask them how you do what can you do today in your current role to be better positioned to work at an organization like that, however many years down the line. Those are the conversations that really, help yield impact and opportunity. Engage people in helping you solve a complex problem in your work. They will remember that process.
I agree. I mean, this is what we like to call the hidden job market, because as you are talking to people and you are putting your name out there and you're asking for advice, someone's going to think this is a really thoughtful person. And when, their friend, their buddy is saying, oh, I've been looking for someone to help out on a project, they're going to think of you. And I think that additionally, I would say in this environment more than ever, be creative. If you hear someone talking about a project their company's looking to launch, new thing, just say, hey, you know what? I've got some extra time right now. I would love to work on that project for you. That very often can turn into a much longer relationship with a company and a full-time role. So don't be afraid to get creative and pitch ideas as well.
Yeah, we have let's jump to another question we have, because I want to make sure we get some more in. This one comes from Nina, and Nina wants to know, and I'll actually piggyback on a question that I was going to ask to the three of you. So I'll open up to all of you. She wants to know, what career advice do you have for the class of 2020 facing a low supply of job opportunities? So what I'll add on to that is, if all of you can explain or give some areas that are hot markets right now that people might not know, but they're consistently looking for people and talent of all sorts of experiences and education levels.
I can start just coming from the higher education point of view, but I want to piggyback a little bit on what Jasmine said, that there is a pause and potentially a delay as companies have adjusted to this new environment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no opportunities or low opportunities. I think we have to use common sense when we think about the different industries and how this economic crisis will affect them. I think many companies and industries are still in it and don't know how it's going to play out. And so they may be on a pause as that happens, or they may be on a pause because they cannot really figure out how to interview, or they just don't want to hire people in this environment and would rather wait until they can onboard somebody in person. And I've definitely seen that. But, within retail, for example, something that's just brick and mortar is going to suffer, obviously, than the e-commerce companies who are doing quite well. Within financial services, restructuring, debt financing. So maybe it's not M&A right now, maybe it's those areas, right? So within each industry, I think you have to think about it's quite a mixed bag. If you really think about it, you think about advisory consulting. Maybe it's more, distress or restructuring, turnaround type advisory than just straight up management consulting. So, think about what you wanted to do and think about how maybe you could pivot it a little bit and really start digging. And you're right, we may not see the same amount, and maybe Jasmine can comment on what they're seeing on their end of jobs, but we're still seeing some. And I would argue that continuing to have the dialogue will sort of open up what's happening inside that company or inside that industry.
Yeah, I love what you shared, Cecilia. I think that it's more nuanced, and we're just kind of at the front end, to be honest, right, of what truly will be the long tail economic impact by industry. There's some very obvious growth that we can think of with the gig economy, our healthcare workers, right? Those folks that we know are kind of on the front line. But if you take a step back and we think through the enterprise of a company, there's some organizations that are growing that maybe aren't as obvious. So things like internet security and finance, right? Like you have organizations who are getting hit right now, but then we still need people to help them kind of go through that process. So the legal industry is growing. So I think that we're still a little early on to see the full effect, but what we're seeing is that a lot of places still have some business as usual, and then thinking through all of the kind of diversity of the roles within that business as usual. So maybe you don't want to be a management consultant, but do they need accountants at that organization? Do they need folks who work in IT, right? HR, like there's so many other departments within a company or an industry to think through. And so I think that's kind of the high level response. And as someone who graduated in the economic recession of 2009, I think there's some tenacity in reminding yourself that, again, like you will land a job. It may not be the initial job that you probably hoped for. I had to take a step back of my original plan, but almost to what the panelists have shared, like I'm still able to use that previous experience to tell the story of how I'm capable of doing the work that I'm doing now. And so I think it's being a little realistic with yourself and being okay pivoting, right? We've talked about that a lot. Being okay pivoting kind of those goals that you have.
Yeah, I so agree. I'm over here nodding and snapping to everything that you all said, especially Jasmine, having been hitting that job market right in 2008 and just, having things fall apart and then rebuild them. And what I'll say to that is if you'll indulge me a little bit to just think a little bit about neuroscience and the way the brain works. When you feel like you are in a desperate state, your capability to think expansively, creatively is shut down, right? So you have to also take a step back and figure out how you shift your mindset to not get stuck into that state of desperation. Some people, many of whom we know and understand, are really, really, really struggling right now. There are some people who cannot pay bills, who cannot feed their children. And if you are one of those people, we see you, right? And so, and if you are not one of those people, you need to be able to see that in yourself and recognize this is bad, but it's not that bad. And I think it's important. And it was important for me in 2008 to be able to say, first of all, can I pay my bills, or at least most of them, the critical ones like food and shelter and things of that nature? I'm not encouraging going into debt, but can I take care of myself? Can I take care of the people around me? Is that covered? And if that's not covered, then there's some survival mode stuff we need to get that covered. Because when that's covered, then you can get back to that creative state of saying, okay, that is covered. So this is not life or death, poverty, no poverty. This is, how do I continue to hold my ambition while being creative in the way I pursue that ambition? And your ambition is bigger than a job, right? Your ambition is bigger than a job. Your ambition is what you want to learn, what you want to be exposed to, the people you want to connect with, the experiences you want to have. And you can get those in a number of places. So to Jasmine's point, if you had a job in mind, but you really wanted that job because of the region it would have put you in, what else can get you to that region? If you had a job in mind and you really wanted it because of the network it gave you access to, what else can give you access to that network? But I think overall, it is taking a step back and saying, how do I cover my basics and really ensure that my core needs for myself and my family are met, so that is not, the wolves are not howling at the door when I'm thinking about my job search process, because that shuts down your ability to be creative and thoughtful. And I hope that that's clear, but I just think it's really important for folks to understand, because sometimes we can get triggered into that state and we don't show up as our best because we're so afraid of what may happen.
The other comment I would make for those of you still in school and graduating, do some research, because there are fellowships that can bridge gaps. There's emergency funds. Do a bunch of research at your own school and see if there are centers of excellence. Maybe there's, for doing a pro bono project for someone, they might be able to fill a gap, and that can help kind of bridge the summer. And there might still be internships for those graduating while they're looking for something new, and that'll add to the skill set as well.
I'd actually love to double click there, Cecilia. So the question that I think it's maybe Nena asked is around the class of 2020, but also class of 2021, right? So you have MBA students right now who are finishing up their first year, and maybe the companies that they had locked in internships with are now canceling their internships. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give to those folks, whether it be that junior and undergrad or that first year MBA student who in this summer would be interning to bolster up their resume? What advice would you give them to help bridge that gap? I know you mentioned there are companies that are still offering internships, but if they can't land something, how do they spend this summer?
Yeah, and I think, I spent a lot of time talking to those first year students. We are working hard at the business school to create opportunities, working for professors, projects on campus. So I would believe that other schools are doing similarly. So definitely look into that. One thing, if your internship is being canceled, it hasn't happened often. It has not happened much at all. But if that were to occur, know that Anything you can do this summer to increase your skill set, maybe it's doing classes, specialized classes, maybe it is doing some projects and pro bono work. And of course, this may depend on your financial situation, but no one is going to look back on this summer when you're doing full-time recruiting and say, why didn't you have a traditional role? You're probably going to put on your resume summer 2020, whether you do something for 2 weeks, for 4 weeks, for 10 weeks. And I think about it, I was talking to a student today, let's think about it as a puzzle piece. You might have 3 experiences instead of, 1 10-week experience. Maybe you still have your internship, but it's been reduced to 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and now you want to fill your time for 2 months, and you can't go travel the world, right? So how do you fill that time? And it really does come down to some of these social enterprise projects that I'm seeing a lot of right now, and we do have opportunities to gain fellowships to cover expenses in that time, and to do classes. I'm finding that there's some data, business analytics classes, coding, those things that you did not have time to do during the regular course of the year that are really going to bolster your resume. But more importantly, many companies still understand the concept. The larger companies know the concept of a pipeline. They cannot lose that pipeline. It'll hurt them 3 years down the line. And most of them, after the crisis, really understand how to size it so that their classes can weather the good times and the bad times. So don't believe that it will be canceled if you haven't heard from your employer. But if it has, know that, maybe it's a startup idea. I can tell you right now, lots of startups who might be struggling would love your experience and your drive to work with them. And just being able to show initiative during this difficult time will go a really long way when you are recruiting for full time.
Yeah, it gets back to the idea of, offering your services, offering your intellectual capacity to somebody as a sign of good faith and relationship building for that future out on the road. It's really, really key. Tony, I see you want to mute there.
Yeah,
Tony.
and then my kids started screaming in the background. So, it's bath time at the Harris Quinnery house. So pardon that. But, to the point of authentic identities. But I'll just say this briefly, and then I'll go back on mute. Try to think about the long game here. I have sat down with chief marketing officers who talk about the experience that the sabbatical that they took 10 years ago when, or however many years ago when they got laid off or when their recession hit or when they took a package or whatnot and went to do something or study something or volunteer at some organization. And they are speaking about that with conviction and bringing that to their chief marketing officer interview 10, 15 years down the line. I know it's really hard to think long term when you're in the midst of trying to figure out how you're going to get a job and pay your bills and start your career. But this is a moment in time that will have a huge impact on your future. But everyone is experiencing that moment in time, and they're going to want to know your story about what you did in this moment in time. They're going to want to know it next year, and the year after, and 10 years from now. So if you don't have a job right now, and you're not able to land the job that you want right now, think about the story you want to tell about what you did in this time 10 years from now. And do that. Find a way to do that, because then you are getting some value that will continue to pay dividends much further out in your career. I wish someone had told me that in 2008.
That's great. What we'll do is, since we have our eyes on the time, can we get a final thought from each of you all? To give a minute to each of you to give your final thoughts on things that you might want to get out there before our time is up.
Sure, I can start.
Yes.
First, I want to say, allow yourself that moment of concern for what's going on and for yourself and for your family. And health is definitely number one, right? But definitely turn that anxiety into action when you can. And just to kind of double down on everything that's been said tonight, hopefully you'll come away with this inspired to find that next chapter. It might feel like a deviation, but it's going to tell an important story in the end, and it's going to really enhance what you bring to the table later on, and stay strong.
I love that. I think the thing I would add, like, this has been such a robust conversation, and we've covered so many great topics. And I'm sitting here just thinking about myself in college, and I wish someone had told me to bet on myself, like that you are capable, like these things, to everyone's point. It is a trueness that we're all going through. But if you have the opportunity to invest in yourself, to bet on yourself, to grow, do that, right? Whether that's via job, whether that's via volunteering, offering up your services, and just trust that you've gotten the skills to get you this far, and those skills will grow and kind of continue. So I'd say bet on yourself, trust and do the work to get yourself there, but have the confidence that you're capable.
Yeah. Agreed. I love that. And I would say when times feel scarce, go lean towards generosity, lean towards abundance, because a scarcity mindset will get you very little. If you believe you have no time to connect with people, you won't connect with people. If you believe you have time in the world to connect with everyone, that connection that you didn't think was going to yield value is probably going to end up being the one that yields value. So as much as you feel an inclination right now to play small, to be scarce, to be really, really specific about what you do in your very, very valuable, precious time, actually go the opposite direction. Take every call. Talk to everybody. Offer your resources. Have every conversation. Don't burn yourself out, but go more towards generosity and abundance than scarcity, and you will find that energy will come back to you.
I gotta say, my fingers are swollen over here for snapping so much. So many great comments. What I'll say to close out is, these are wild times. A lot of uncertainty right now, and it's okay to say that, and it's okay to own that. But I think, it's really important to remember that we should not be waiting for things to return to normal, quote unquote. This is going to change things forever. And that's also going to be okay. We're going to make it through that too. And I think it's using this time to continue to build yourself up, use this time to build your community up. Really make sure that you're executing what Tony and I spoke about the other day, was called an executive mindset, but just, building up your capacity so that when you are back in the workforce, if you're not working right now, or if you're currently working and still trying to grow in your career, that you're always pushing things ahead. This is a great time to self-reflect and to self-educate. So just wanted to put that out there as a point of encouragement for everybody.
Yeah, and I'll end on a note that I wanted to make sure that I got out. In the New York area, we've been through what we call is a mini Armageddon. The Times Square is empty. We can't get toilet paper and catch up in the things that we're accustomed to getting. So I wanted to definitely give a salute to everybody that's out there, still going in, saving lives. Still going to work on the front lines, whether it's stocking groceries, whether it's driving Uber cars still, and everyone putting their life at risk. I want to make sure that we give a salute out to them, because those are the jobs that matter, and they're all looking out for us when we can't look out for ourselves. And in addition to that, the people that we lost, our thoughts go out to them, because we can't really be with the people and mourn and grieve with them. So I wanted to definitely say that. I want to thank everybody for joining. It's an excellent panel. Absolutely breathtaking, the answers that you all gave. We're very happy to have you, and we want to make sure that we move on. Please come back. We'll have more of these in the future, more of these talks. Be on the lookout for them on social media, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.